It's a hard day for me watching the tornadoes. It's terrible. But I always take comfort in my KU Jayhawks, because usually at least one of those two teams is doing all right. So I have a bunch of hot topics to talk to you about today. I'm going to try to take questions as we go. And what that probably will mean is that we won't make it to the very end. So I try to put the stuff that your leadership people ask me to talk about at the front end, so that if you don't make it to the end, it's not so bad. But it's all written down there in your materials, including our website and our phone number, and you should feel free to give us a call anytime you want. I can't take everybody's call personally, but we have a big staff, and we have 3 people on duty every day whose job it is to help out people like you who have questions about their real estate transactions, whether it's sales or rentals, commercial, residential, whatever it is, real estate related. We will try to help you if we can, and if not, put you on the path to somebody who can help you. So, just a little about us. I'm pretty sure everybody in the room knows all this, but just to make sure, I am from the government. I am here to help you. It's an all joke, but I keep using it. But I am here to help you. And seriously, it's a lot of time and resources for us to deal with the complaint side of things and the people who get in trouble. And it's so much easier for us and for you if we can deal with the issues that come up as they come up. And as I said, try to guide you down the right road ahead of time rather than wag our fingers at you afterwards. And so please feel free to take advantage of the resource that we have. North Carolina is very lucky in that we have an independent, freestanding real estate commission with people on staff who are ready to take your calls to help you. That has become a greater and greater unusual thing these days. Many government agencies who regulate brokers are very hard to find in other states, and they don't have enough people to really be of assistance to the people they regulate. And so we're lucky here in North Carolina that we are this way. We can be your source for real estate information, and we want to be, so please do take advantage of it. We have 2 primary functions. We have a licensing function and a regulatory function. So on the licensing side, we're responsible for people's pre-licensing education, all those classes that you had to take in order to get your license in the first place. We set the curriculum for those. We approve the instructors in the schools for those. And likewise, for provisional brokers in the room, are there some? Any? Wow, everybody's on their way to a broker license. You know, now we have provisional brokers and we don't know what to call everybody else. So you're either a full broker or a regular broker or a broker or I don't know broker, but anyway. Yeah. So sometimes you make changes and you don't realize the problems you're going to create. We don't know what to call you guys. We do also look at people's character before they come into the profession to make sure that they have the necessary good and moral character to be a real estate license. I'm sure you could argue about whether we've done the right job on that. Like, really? You let her in? Really? But we do try. And we do try to take a sympathetic point of view and hope that people will up to the license, and then if they don't, we can get to the regulatory side if we have to. We do receive complaints. We get on average about 1,000 complaints every year. There are 92,000 licensees, so I guess that means your chances are 1 in 92, which is not bad. And some people get complained about more than once, so maybe that means your chances are more like 1 in 100. Okay, if you want to call us and ask a question, as I said, we do have people on phone duty, we call it. They are in what used to be our legal division. We have recently merged our legal division with our audits and investigations division. And so now it's a regulatory affairs division, but the same people are still there taking your calls. So that's our phone number, please use it. Also, our website, NCREC.gov, has a ton of information, and if we get to it at the end, I'll walk you through some things you can use to help you find what you need. And likewise, we have people who are happy to come and do what I'm doing right now, which is to come and talk to you all and answer your questions. So, free legal advice for the next hour and a half, and I've not taken names. I will confess, in the interest of full disclosure, that when you call our office, we now have call tracking. And so we probably are going to know who you are unless you're at a phone booth, and those are hard to find. I think cell phones actually are a lot easier a lot easier to hide behind, so you can block your number if you want to be truly anonymous when you call, or you can borrow a friend's cell phone and say that you're them. We meet every month. The commission has a meeting mostly in Raleigh. Once a year we go on the road somewhere or other. The closest we've been to Charlotte is Coopersville, which we found cheaper than Charlotte, sorry, but we were in the area. These are our upcoming meetings, February, March, and April. They are at the Commission's office. They're open to the public. Y'all are welcome. I know it's a 2.5-hour drive because I just made it, but it's actually a fairly easy 2.5-hour drive, especially if you know your way around Charlotte, which I don't. So I followed my GPS here, and I waited for a train, and I waited at stoplights, and then I discovered there was a major road right where I was headed, and I don't know why my GPS didn't know about it. Probably you do. So we're actually right off the Bell Line in Raleigh. We're easy to find. Some of the meeting is very interesting, and you would enjoy it. Some of it is very boring, and you can sleep through it, and then get somebody to elbow you when it comes up. So come and see what we do. I think one of the major things people wanted to hear about are law and rule changes. Again, in the interest of full disclosure, I'll tell you that if you take your update course, which you all should, before June 10th, you will learn these same things, but in more excruciating detail. I'm going to give you the short version. So, and some of these aren't in there because we've already covered it. But if for those 2 or 3 provisional brokers in the room, we did change the law recently. It used to be that you had 3 years to get your license up to that full broker status, whatever we call it. And if you didn't do it, you were out. You were just out. Your license was canceled. That didn't seem very fair, especially since we did that right at the time when the market was tanking. And so there weren't as many people offering classes. It was harder to get them. People didn't have a lot of money to scrape together to pay for their classes because the market had declined. And so we asked the legislature to change the law, and they did, so that instead of having your license be canceled, you go to inactive status. So if you don't get your 3 30-hour post-licensing courses in on time, which is at least 1 a year for 3 years, you now move to inactive status. And then if you want to get back in, you can, and it depends how long you wait, what you have to take. The longer you wait, the more you have to take. Your classes that you did take will age out after a while. At least you don't have to take the license exam again, and you don't have to go through the character assessment again. So it's a little bit of an easier road to be licensed if you need it. So that's that. Another little change in the law that affects your commission. So an important one to be mindful of. We have a rule at the Real Estate Commission that says that all of your brokerage agreements have to be in writing. And that's been there forever. It's been a long time. But we had a court case a couple of years ago where somebody violated the Real Estate Commission's rule. They didn't have an agreement in writing. They got disciplined for that. But the Court of Appeals said it didn't matter. They were still entitled to receive a commission. And that didn't feel right to a lot of people. And so a new law clarifies that without a written agreement, you can't sue for a commission. So in order to protect yourself, you really need to make sure that you have all of your agency agreements in writing. I mean, I think that's common sense anyway. I mean, you want to write down what the expectation is between you and your client, whether you're in sales or property management, commercial, residential. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean, and I hopefully people will buy into this idea. You have your contracts in writing for this kind of a dollar transaction. It's important. And if you don't now, then you cannot sue. So there's a practical reason whether you believe in the policy behind this or not. We also have recently had big changes with our reciprocity agreements. We used to have reciprocity with about a dozen different states around the country, and they were kind of random. We hoped and tried to have reciprocity with our neighbors, primarily, like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, all those people who are around us, but we couldn't always do it. We couldn't get reciprocity with Virginia because of Virginia law, and we couldn't get reciprocity with Florida because of Florida law. And we were finding that over time, other states were going to a different system where they had a state-specific licensing exam that you have to pass in order to practice brokerage in their state. And you know, that reminds me that I'm hoping my phone doesn't go off for the next hour. I'm not going to check it, but if it does, y'all just get up and do the happy dance while it rings. So we ultimately moved to the same system that most other states have already moved to, which is that we now have a two-part exam. It has a state portion and a national portion. And if you have a license in another state, you have to pass the state portion of the North Carolina exam. Now, I'm imagining that a bunch of you in the room have a reciprocal license in South Carolina. Yeah, look at all those people. Yeah, and that's fine. Your license is fine. It'll stay fine so long as you renew here and there. North Carolina will continue to license you so long as you pay your renewal fee here, and you can be on active status so long as you take your continuing ed. So just keep those two things up and you'll be fine. It doesn't matter that the law changed. It's different for people coming in now. So if today you don't have, if you're not one of those people who raise your hands and you want to go practice in South Carolina, I can't speak for South Carolina, but I believe you're going to have to take a South Carolina license exam. And it won't be the whole thing, it'll be the bit that's about South Carolina law. And the feeling being that whichever state you're going to, you want to know the quirky bits about their law and rules. And so it'll help you be a better broker to know the quirky bits about South Carolina or North Carolina or Virginia or wherever it may be. And then you'll be in better shape to practice there. Okay. So we're talking about this at lunch. Mineral, gas, and oil rights. Whoever thought we would be thinking about this? But it turns out we do. So, mineral, gas, and oil rights. So, in a lot of states in the West, this has been common practice for a long, long time, but not so much here in the East. And now it's moving east because, well, we just had Piedmont Natural Gas up here, and they're looking for more resources for gas so that they can serve more customers, and because the easy resources are slowly over time going to diminish. And so what's happened is we've had interest in figuring out other ways to get gas out of the ground. So minerals, oils, and gases are underground, and it is possible legally, and there's lots of precedent in other states, for those things to be owned separately from the land on top. So we have developers who reserve mineral rights in their deeds to themselves, then they convey property to you. And we had a major home builder in the state who actually did that on a routine basis for quite a while in the area where I'm from, which is the Triangle area. So they were selling houses, and in their deeds and in their contracts, both, they had a reservation of gas, oil, mineral rights that said, we're selling you the land, you can do whatever you want to with it, but we retain the right for these things that are underneath the ground, and we're going to keep those for ourselves. And people said, sure, fine, and I think a lot of people didn't even realize that that was in there. Well, then the newspaper, the Raleigh News and Observer, ran a big story about it because people were having trouble when they conveyed their property. Maybe the buyer's closing attorney would notice it was in there and say, hey, you realize. And then the other thing that happened is that the North Carolina General Assembly legalized fracking last year. And so suddenly that reservation of oil, gas, and mineral rights that didn't used to really matter because nobody could do anything with them anyway, now the General Assembly says that they can. Now the General Assembly says you can dig down and frack, which is hydraulic fracking, and I'll have you a picture in a second. No, I won't, but we'll talk about it anyway. So I have two versions of this thing, and I have this slightly older version up here right now. So some companies reserve before they convey, and in their deed, before they, in a new home subdivision, say, all the houses in that subdivision could come with a reservation of mineral rights, which means the developer company is keeping those, and then they're selling everything else. And you can still build a house on it, you can still have your utilities, and you can still do all that you do. But you're saying that it's okay for the company to go under your house, probably more than a mile under your house, and get out the valuable things that are down there. So, our new law, as I mentioned, allows fracking, and here's how it goes. This is the Miriam Baer method. It's a really scaled down version of how you actually do it, but you go straight down. You go down more than a mile. That's a long way. I think that's 5,280 feet. Somebody in the room probably knows for sure, but it's a long way down. Just think about it if you run or if you've ever tried to run, how far it is to run a mile. Okay? It's far, at least for me. That's a moment. Okay, so you get down a mile, and then you make a turn and you go across horizontally. And then you have pipes coming out, this down and over, and you have holes that come out, and you have water and chemicals and sand going down into the pipe at high pressure, whooshing down in there and then pushing out once you're in the horizontal part, pushing out and up. And what that does is it makes little fractures all the way along in the rocks that are around it, which are the big heavy-duty rocks down way below the earth, which have gas trapped inside of them. And that process of opening up those little fissures in the rocks, then the gas that's in there looks for a way to escape. And they build in ways to escape for that gas so that they can capture it and then sell it to us for our beautiful gas logs and our gas heat and our gas stoves. Personally love my gas logs wherever the Piedmont people are. I have a heat pump. I love my gas logs. And I love that when my power goes out, like it did, that I can still flip the switch and the logs are on. And they give me some warmth. So there's a demand for gas. We all like it. And so this is how you get it. So now we've legalized fracking. We understand kind of vaguely how it works. And the legislature said when they legalized fracking that we had to make a disclosure to people so that they would know if they're buying a property where they don't own the gas and oil rights anymore. So there was much talk about where we were going to make that disclosure, and most people's first reaction is, well, it should be in the residential property disclosure statement. But the problem with the residential property disclosure statement is that it has a lot of exceptions, which include new home construction. And new home construction is probably where you need this disclosure the very most, because it's the developers who are in the best position to separate, to reserve those oil and gas rights to themselves, so that they can sell in aggregate. Here's the whole subdivision. They've got those severed mineral rights for that, however many acres it is. That's something we're selling. You know, if you got somebody who lives on an eighth or a quarter of an acre or even a half or a full acre or even 2 or 3 acres, that standing alone is not going to interest Piedmont Natural Gas or Public Service Company of North Carolina or whoever drilling and mining company it is that comes in to get that. They want the biggest group of lots of land that they can get so they can do their work unfettered. And so developers are the place to start. And so, because they've got lots of land and they might be subdividing it, but then they're keeping for every bit that they sell off the underground rights. So are you with me? Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
So if I had sold a DR Horton house 5 years ago, then it would probably not be a bad idea to go with that contract to see what's conveyed.
Yes, I think if you sold the DR Horton house 5 years ago, it would be a good idea to have whoever owns it, to check in with them. I mean, you don't have a duty. You don't. Okay. You sold it, it's 5 years ago, you have no duty. But if I were that homeowner and I owned a DR Horton house, DR Horton got all the bad publicity in the newspaper, right? And actually their deed and their contract both clearly disclosed what they were doing. But people didn't really understand what that meant. At any rate, DR Horton didn't want the bad publicity, and they really weren't doing anything with their gas and mineral rights. So DR Horton has said publicly that they will give back anybody's rights that wants to have them. So if somebody you know has a DR Horton house, then they ought to check their deed, see if they or somebody in the prior chain of title gave away the mineral rights, and then talk to DR Horton about whether they can get them back.
I was thinking more of a listing agent. Say I'm meeting the seller, I know they just purchased this.
Okay.
I need to go and help them figure out what the situation is. Because for both sides.
That's a really good question. Because it's a really good question, and I think ideally you would. I mean, ultimately it's a lawyer's question, not a listing agent's question. You all are not in a position to be able to search titles and figure out whether or not mineral rights have been reserved. So the Real Estate Commission is not going to expect you to do that, just to say so. But let's say that over time we realize that some subdivision in Charlotte was developed by D.R. Gordon or somebody else, and it becomes, we start to realize that all the houses in that subdivision had the mineral rights severed. If that ever comes to pass where it becomes common knowledge, then my answer might change. Then my answer might change to, you should at least put the buyer on notice that's possible and make sure that their attorney checks it out.
Kind of like oil.
Pardon?
Kind of like oil tanks in certain areas.
Yeah, right. You get to know your market and you realize certain areas have certain quirks about them. And if it comes to be that, then maybe. But until then, no. Yes?
Do you anticipate that this problem will become part of the standard title search?
Yes, I do anticipate that this will become part of the standard title search. Yes. I think over time, especially, I mean, we have to see how the industry develops. And right now, the General Assembly has said you can do it. We're still waiting for rules to come out. You can't do it at this moment. We're waiting for rules to come out, which are supposed to be effective in April, I think it is. It's in the slides, 2014. And so it's at that moment that people will be able to start doing it. And then, yeah, I think it's going to become more and more of an issue. Yes?
Yes. Are they all going to be recorded? All those rights will be recorded?
Yes, they have to be recorded.
And secondly, if it's within one particular property owner, wouldn't it be fracking up underneath all their neighbors? Would they be involved with all their other neighbors that having infringement on their rights?
Yeah, so I'm waiting for the rules to come out to see how this is actually going to go. But my understanding is that, let's say you have an area where the majority of the owners have severed their gas and mineral rights, but maybe there's one lone guy in the middle, you know, whose house hasn't given up those rights. The law allows them to go ahead and frack. So my understanding is that you can't, and even if they have to make a bend and go around you, it's possible. I mean, and here's where the political argument starts to happen, and I'm not enough of an expert to say, but some people would say it's perfectly safe. It can be regulated to be perfectly safe. We're talking a mile below the earth, so the chances of something bad happening are slim to none. And then, of course, you have the people who say, yeah, but did you see that person's well that caught on fire? You know, the internet is full of the bad examples. And so it's hard, I think, for us to know yet how it's going to be done. And North Carolina's rules might be really strict or they might be really easy, and we don't know yet what they're going to be. Somebody up here. Yes, ma'am?
It says perhaps a mile or more. Is there a definitive?
No. Well, I'm not the expert to ask. So what I know is what I've researched and read and learned from the people in my office who have researched and read more. But in general, it's about a mile, and often it's more than a mile. I've seen like in the 8,000 feet range. A mile is 5,000 feet. So their idea is to get below down to the really, and here's, you know, I'm not a geologist, so I should just stop talking. But it's the really, really, really solid rock that they're trying to get into. And I think part depends on the actual geology of the area. And also there are places like my house, and I live in Durham. My house is right in the middle of this big, you know, area that's full of potential gas and shale rock and all that stuff. But then there are other places in the state, like Charlotte, where I think there's a whole lot less of it, so it's a less attractive market. So, you know, if there's a listing agent in the house, maybe I'll need that move. Although it would be a long commute. Okay, one more.
The reason I'm asking that is because, like around Pittsburgh and below Pittsburgh and West Virginia, there are whole streets that will collapse where they have sublined under it for utilities and so forth. And there's a downtown street in Fairmont, West Virginia, we're right next to a big bank building.
Yes, ma'am.
Miriam, do you think, I think we need to have something in our listing contract that requires the seller to say that they're not notice about
No,
this.
you should talk to the incoming chairman of the forms committee. I think there aren't you already talking about that? So the listing contract, she's suggesting that maybe in the listing contract, we should have something. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I'm a wanderer. Is that good? Okay, so her suggestion is that maybe we should have something in the listing contract. And I think that that's not a bad idea, except again, you're counting on the seller to know. And so, in general, we've tried to limit the listing contract to those things that a seller reasonably could know. And maybe there will come a time when sellers will know this about their property. But I consider myself a fairly knowledgeable and sophisticated seller. You know, I've been a lawyer for the Real Estate Commission for 23 years. I'm the executive director of the Real Estate Commission now. I don't know for sure. I assume that there has been no reservation of oil and mineral rights in the deed for my personal residence. I assume it, but have I done a search? Have I hired somebody? I hired somebody to do a title search. I think it's fine, but nobody, it wasn't on anybody's radar when I bought my house. Nobody was talking about it or thinking about it. And if it's in there, it's in there. But it's not like it's in red and underlined and like the thing we make you do about earning interest on your trust money. It's not like that. There's no like arrow, notice me, nothing. So like with the DR Court example, it was in there. If you read it, you would see it. But I'll confess, you know, I went to my closing just like everybody else. Here's a stack of papers. You start signing. You know, and I'm more careful than a lot of people. I at least scan them and try and make sure I know what it is. But did I read every word? Heck no. Do I just hit accept on the website and not scroll through that agreement? Sure I do.
Do you know what your water rights are?
Yes, they're polybutylene.
Most sellers have no clue.
Yes, well, they're here, you know, that's because I'm with the Real Estate Commission and I had to research polybutylene pipes back in the day when polybutylene piping was like the hot button, oh my God. And it's like, of course, I had them in my former house and I have them in my new house. But I have the fittings that are right and so far so good. Yes, ma'am.
I feel like maybe that section is more appropriate for a commercial.
What section?
The section where they have to disclose, because most buyers don't know, and they're saying, yeah, you have not severed, no, and then the no representation, but a lot of them mark no. So if the buyer is marking those for the seller, and the seller doesn't have a clue, they're signing off and going, yeah, that sounds right, I didn't do it myself, but I don't know from before. And they assume that knows that there's a no representation.
Right, and the law says that you only, and then you're talking about in the offer to purchase. So the offer to purchase language, we'll come to it, why don't I get there? But this language is not Real Estate Commission language, and it's not an Association of Realtor language, it's North Carolina General Assembly language. So those are the exceptions, you got them on the paper, they're fairly limited. Here's the language. I didn't format it because you wouldn't be able to read the print if I put it in the format that it is on the form. But that's how it looks on the offer to purchase itself right now, and that's because the lawmakers in Raleigh said you use these words with these choices. It is not something that the Forms Committee or the Real Estate Commission can change. It would have to be changed by the General Assembly. And the General Assembly gave us all the option to say no representation, which is what that no rep is. It actually says no representation on the form. I just ran out of room. When it relates to a previous owner. But otherwise, on question 2 and question 3, the form assumes that the seller knows if the seller himself or herself either already severed the rights or plans to sever the rights before they convey. So if before I sell my property to you, I'm going to go make a deal with Oil Companies R Us and sell them my gas and mineral rights, the legislature is assuming I know that. Now, and I think this is arguable, that I might not necessarily know. And me personally, if I were selling my house today, I would say no representation for question number 1. Because I honestly don't know for sure, and I don't want to be held accountable even if I think I know. Even if I'm 99% sure I've read every word of every deed and I didn't see it in there. But still, I'm a lawyer. I would say, right, no representation. Why am I going to hold myself accountable for something if I don't have to and I'm not 100% about it? And then I know that I have not severed. I know I haven't made any deal with any oil company or any aggregator of these minerals and oils and gases. I haven't. So I'm going to say no to question 2. And I know I'm going to say no to question 3.
Still would that be more appropriate on the listing agreement, and also more appropriate on the property disclosure still. I understand that, new construction is not required for a property disclosure. For new construction homes, all of them, all the builders use their own contract anyhow. They don't use our contract.
It doesn't matter if they're using our contract or another contract, it has to be in their contract too.
That's what I'm saying. It has to be in their contract, but those are the ones that are doing it. So my point is that on our general offer of purchase, you're talking about an average homeowner. 99.9% of the time.
Yes.
It's going to put no representation and no. And
Yes.
let's say no for sure.
Right.
If they know for sure, it should be the listing agreement.
Well,
Have to disclose.
but the listing agreement is yes and no. I don't entirely agree with you, that's me. It's kind of a moot point because it doesn't really matter. This is what the law says. So whether we agree with it or we don't agree with it, unless you want to go to your legislators and say, you need to fix this, it doesn't work in reality. But my personal opinion is it actually does work in reality, because if it's VR Horton or it's MI Homes or whoever it is, they might not use our offer to purchase, they might. If they don't, they have to stick that exact language in their offer to purchase. And if they don't, they're violating the law. And so, and having it in a purchase contract means it's an agreement between the seller and the buyer about the quality of their title. It's like, what are you selling me, Mr. Seller? What are you selling me? Are you selling me the whole property, or are you selling me the top of the property, but you get to keep what's underneath it? And that's important. To me, it's important. Some people don't care. To me, though, it's important. I want to own all the way down to the fiery core. And I could own the other and wind up on some tropical island outside of Australia and own that too. That'd be even better. Yes.
Are we not only talking about the oil and gas, are we talking about all mineral rights?
Well, there's another.
Because we've got problems. Gold rights are coming out from
Right.
Kershaw and up here to Ferris County. Now, when we do evaluation of property, we have no longer a bundle of rights. Now we're going to be taking off those rights. Now, taking off those rights, aren't they evaluating all the properties?
Well, you have to ask an appraiser, but yeah, I mean, if there's a market for it, then they must be worth something, right? People want to buy whatever they want to buy. They want to buy the oil and gas rights, they want to buy the mineral rights, they want to buy the gold rights, they want to buy mining rights, whatever, then it has value to them. So, sure, I would think it could affect an appraisal. It could affect, ultimately, your decision about how to list a property. Yes?
What I hear you saying is the bottom line, if it's important to our buyers, get the attorney to do a proper and thorough title search. That's the answer.
Yeah.
We have to live with what the legislature has said.
Right, and so if your seller turns out to have answered the question wrong, I mean, we haven't gotten there yet, but it seems to me that then the seller can't convey what he promised to convey, and the buyer probably is going to have an out from purchasing the property. If you get right up to closing and the closing attorney says, sorry, I just discovered that, MI Homes owns the mineral rights to this land because back in 1942 they reserved the rights, and they were called ABC, construction company then, but it's traveled on up in the deed, it's right over the land, they own the rights. Then that would change for me as a buyer, my interest in the property, absolutely. That might be a bias on my part, and I'll just confess to that bias right up front and say, I don't want to own a house where underneath me they might be drilling. I like the solidity of feeling like my foundation is, good. Yes? rights were severed by a previous owner, yes, no, no representation. Still, the contract, here's how I would answer it. The contract says I'm going to convey clean title, with no exceptions. I'm going to give you a general warranty deed. There are a couple of limited exceptions in the contract, but they're just like for, you know, for Duke Power or Piedmont Natural Gas to run their lines, but otherwise it's not included. So I still think the answer would be yes, it's possible that the buyer could walk away. And the buyer, many buyers would walk away anyway and say, so soon.
Well, I guess, my point is, I understand we can't change it, but, you know, if the buyer, the one filling it out, is marked as a no representation, now the seller is going to, now the seller, they know it's not a no, it's a no representation, no one's talking about a counter offer. At that
Yes.
point, you know that you signed
Yes.
everything else.
Yes.
And now that buyer is now not obligated to purchase.
Yes.
This is fine, understandable.
Well, and they have their due diligence period in, right?
But if the seller signs off on a no, and their due diligence period has run out, and they come to find out that it is really a, hey, the mineral rights are still there, now they have an out for everybody to hire a return.
Potentially, yes.
There's so many little fine lines that is now getting our sellers caught up in, and they're cities now.
Right.
Until the title search is done.
Well, I think this, yes, they don't know until the title search is done. And I think what's going to happen is there are going to be pockets where this is a problem for all eternity, and there are going to be pockets where after we get used to it, it's going to be like, oh yeah, there's never mineral rights, and it's all going to be fine. And then once in a while, you'll have a weird case where something comes up. And I think actually you and Charlotte are in a better position geographically, because I think you're, or worse, depending on how you look at it. I mean, some people feel like, yay, come frack, I'm going to make some money, because you're going to pay me for that, right? So it is an opportunity to make money. So, on the offer and purchase of contract, how do we deal with it? This is in your update course this year, and really I think you have a bunch of choices. If it were me, I would pick choice number one. I would fill in the answers as I want them to be. You know, I want the answer to be no, 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 or at least no rep, no, no, right? That's what I want. And so my offer would be to you as a seller, if you all are the seller, to say to you, I want you to be able to tell me, no, nobody's ever severed the rights, you're not severing the rights, you haven't done it, you don't intend to do it. That's what I would want. And then it would be up to you, the seller, or you, the listing agent and the seller, to say, well, actually, I'm going to say no representation as to number one, which if I change places and say I'm the seller now, that's what I would do. I would say no representation and no, no. Unless I was so desperate that I was willing to go out on a limb and just say I accept your offer because I really, really, really need to sell my house right now. And I'm going to take the chance, which I might do depending on my personal circumstances. So that's one option. And if it's wrong, the way you get it, if you're the listing agent and it says no, 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 but you want to change one of those answers or all those answers, then you would change them. Your seller would initial those changes. And then it would be a counteroffer. And then the buyer would have the right to say, well, if you severed or you plan to sever or your previous owner severed, I don't want this property. And then another option is to find out in advance what the right answers are, what the seller is going to change it to if you don't put it the way the seller wants it. So call the listing agent up and say, has the seller ever severed? Is he going to sever? Can he give me the mineral rights? And then fill in the answers based on what the listing agent suggests. Or you can leave it blank and let them fill it in, and then it absolutely will be a counteroffer when it comes back to you. Right? Which means it can't be accepted until you sign off on it. Another option. In general, the commission suggests not leaving things blank because people then fill in stuff and you don't notice, and you just assume, oh look, they signed my offer, and you don't go back and realize, oh my God, they've severed the mineral rights, and my buyer really cares about that. Okay? So, for more information, actually, that last one, CNN has a bunch of videos on fracking. Some of them are just informative, how it works, pictures. It says very useful. The Department of Justice, that's the AG's office, the Attorney General's office. They have 2 brochures out now. They're on our website as well. And they're handy. One's about leasing in particular. particular, the other one's more general. The Real Estate Commission was asked to help write one of those, and we did, and they've both now been published. So that's the NCDOJ's website, but you can also get them from the Real Estate Commission. And this topic is covered in more detail, not a whole lot more than this, but some more detail in your update course, and I imagine most of you haven't taken it yet. So maybe you all have. You know. My CLE for my law degree is, my deadline is the end of the year, so in November and December, I'm doing what you guys do in May or June. So, if you haven't taken it, it's in there. Okay, so enough about oil and gas. Here's the residential property disclosure statement. It came into effect on January 1st. Of course, we've had property, we've had property disclosure statements for a long time. What happened on January 1st is that a new version of it came out. Last year, the Real Estate Commission was directed by the General Assembly to change the form up to add homeowner associations to it, and all that bit at the end about associations and how much the dues are and who the president is and whatever's in there, right? All that stuff. The legislature, unfortunately, gave us really even less time than is legally possible to make the new form. So we had to institute what are called temporary rules just to meet our statutory mandate and get a form out there for you to use. But at the same time, we decided it was really the right moment to look at that form, because every time some new question needed to be added, we have to retrofit it into the form under the right leading question and try to get it worded well enough to make it understandable, and it got to kind of out of hand. So we've overhauled the whole form now, and it's the one, that's the one that's come out January 1st. If you had a listing that carried over, you can still have the old one, but on your new listings, you should have the new one. Each question stands alone. I think for the most part, you will like the new one much better, because you don't have to go back and figure out what the leading question is. Are we talking about problems, or are we just talking about what's there and what's not there? And then the homeowners associations, as is required by law, are still addressed there, and they're still at the end of the form, so you can just skip that part if you have listing where there is no homeowner association. They are together at the end. So use the new one. Instructions. The instructions have been clarified. We're trying to get the point across that this is an actual knowledge standard. You know, it's not a guarantee. It's what the seller actually knows. So, do you know if the roof leaks? Do you know if there's a foundation problem? Do you know if there's asbestos tile? Whatever. I mean, I'm making those up. But the gist of it is, does the seller know these things? And the answer is either yes, I know, and here's what it is, or no, I don't know. But I don't know means, N-O, means I don't know, K-N-O-W. It means I don't know. That's all I'm saying, I don't know. So we're trying to be more clear that that's what the no choice means. Still, as a lawyer, I perfectly understand the no representation option when selling one's property. I've sold 2 houses, and once I represented and once I didn't. And, you know, I can see going either way. So a seller can make no representations. My point here at the very bottom is that if the roof leaks, the seller is allowed to say no representation. If the roof leaks and the seller knows it and the listing agent knows it, the seller can either say yes, the roof leaks, or no representation. The seller can't say no, because the seller knows that the roof leaks. The real estate broker can't say no representation. The real estate broker cannot say no. The real estate broker must say yes.
I assume that broker, if it's a broker selling their own property, the broker rule applies.
The broker rule applies to brokers selling their own property. And brokers do get tripped up by this from time to time, because they are held to a higher standard merely because they have a broker license. And we could argue about the fairness of that, but it is what the law says. And so if you're a broker, you've got to disclose. And if you're the listing agent and you know some negative quality or fact about something like the roof leaks, then you have an affirmative duty to tell. You can't keep it to yourself. You don't have to check a box on the form, but you have an affirmative duty to disclose it. It's a material fact. Okay, so we could go as detailed or not as you want. Some things to notice about the new form. We've separated out the questions. So the old form was always about the property, the property, the property. But clearly some of those questions were really just about the house. And some of those were about the house and land. And then we often had discussions about whether the outbuildings or the freestanding garage or whatever other structure, like maybe the house is in fabulous shape and it's been rehabbed and it's wonderful, but there's a shed from the 1920s on the back corner that's never been anything, and its foundation is horrible and it's got termites in the roof leaks, so what do you say? So we've tried to clarify when we're talking about the dwelling, which means the place where the people live, as opposed to any of those other structures, versus the whole property, which would include the land and the retaining walls and the other structures. So just as you're going through the form, be mindful of the fact that property means everything, dwelling means a house. And then there's little tweaks all the way through. For example, number 1, you can explain your answer about when the house was built, because sometimes the house was built in 1952, but then there was a fire in 1987, and 3/4 of it was rebuilt in 1987, and then we added the screen-in porch in 1998, and so on. So there's a little bit more room to deal with that kind of stuff. There's a whole lot more in there about the heating, ventilation, air conditioning in questions 10 through 12. If you happen to have a shared well, you can deal with that now. Back to this actual knowledge standard, we've clarified, especially on the ones where we had issues along the way in the past, it's a do you know? Do you know how many bedrooms are allowed by the septic permit? Maybe you do. If you do, great. How many? If you don't, you can just say no. I don't know. 19. Okay, so we used to talk about systems and fixtures, and everybody's like, well, what's a system, what's a fixture? So now they're all listed. And there is a catch-all at the end, but it gives you an idea of what we're talking about. 20 used to say built-in appliances, and now it's all the appliances that are going to convey, whether they're built-in or whether they're not. So we got a freestanding stove or something, but it doesn't work, then you make a representation that it doesn't work, or you make no representation. 23 is more about additions and structural changes. 33 is in the new part and all about homeowner associations are now imposing transfer fees. It's just another little administrative fee, and I'm sure if you talk to them, they'd have a good explanation for what that's all about and why it costs them $100 or $750 or whatever it is to transfer the ownership of the property on their records from me to you. But at any rate, there's a place for that on the form. Yes, ma'am?
I'm finding difficulty, I won't even say the company, but I actually called the company to ask what the transfer fee would be because the listing agent was having a time. And they refused to give me the information. Refused. I went to what was going to be our closing attorney. We still had issues to work out. And he said, yeah, that is becoming more and more of a problem. Is there anything that the commission can do about these management companies that are refusing? Her excuse was, well, all these agents ask us these questions and then sometimes they don't close. And I'm going, yeah, we're supposed to give a net sheet to our buyer of what potentially will cost them to do things for doing our job. And that's one of the little details you need to know about. All you have to do is tell them the dollar amount. You know?
Right, and we've run across this too. So the commission doesn't have authority over homeowner associations or over homeowner association managers. There's been a lot of discussion in the last 4 years at the General Assembly about those topics and whether homeowner association managers should be regulated or the associations themselves should be regulated, because there's a lot of anger out there in the world about homeowner associations. Unfortunately, the anger is kind of two-sided. There's the people who think that owners associations are like mini governments and they have way too much power, that these are governmental powers and they shouldn't be bestowed on an association, which is just a group of people who were elected, except they probably were by their local community, but it's like that's too much government, you're giving too much governmental power to this group of people who are not utilizing that power wisely. And then you've got the other people who are like, you know, my neighbor just puts his semi-tractor trailer in the front yard and lets his Rottweilers run at will, and he painted his house chartreuse, which is either ugly pink or ugly green, I can't remember. But, you know, so there are people who want associations and their managers to be more regulated, and there are other people who are equally angry who want them to be less regulated. And so the General Assembly keeps talking, but so far, no actual, just little tweaks in the law. There was a little tweak in the law last year to give homeowners more time, especially military people, if their homeowner association was coming after them, and have more procedural protections in place. But that's about it.
In follow-up with that, I gave this article to the attorney. I made a copy of it and listened to the Observer not too long ago that supposedly transfer fees were illegal.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I've never heard that they
An
are.
article on it, and I went, say what? Well, nobody else got that message apparently. But
Yeah, well, if you can find it and you want to shoot it to me, I'd be happy to look at it, and then we can get our legal people to follow up and see. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question regarding the inspection report and whose property is it? It's,
Who owns the inspection report? We talked about this at lunch too. So whoever paid for it typically owns the inspection report, and that's usually buyer number one in a failed transaction, right? So buyer number one pays for the inspection report, doesn't like what it says, and then the question is, do you have to supply a copy of that to buyer number two? And the answer is no and yes. You don't have to actually, see, I'm a lawyer, so I get to give the wishy-washy answer, but what actually is true is you don't have to give the piece of paper. So you've got the report in your hand. You don't have to convey that whole report to buyer number two, but if you now know some negative facts about the property, like it's got asbestos and the roof leaks, then you have to convey that information to buyer number two, some way or other. Now, some inspectors will even copyright their reports, which would give me pause about copying and distributing out. So what I would do is just say, okay, here are the bad facts that we now know, and you as a broker have a duty to disclose material facts, so you disclose those, and then suggest strongly that the buyer get their own expert in to look at the property, particularly looking at those things, and make their own decision. And then hopefully you can also tell them, but my seller is going to fix it, or they're already working on it, or whatever.
if it is not copyrighted, you don't have a listing agent that gives that
If it's not copyrighted, can the listing agent give it?
to buyers.
Let's just say that the real estate commission would not give you a bad time if that's what happens. Whether some home inspector might give you a bad time, I don't know, and I don't want to promise you, but I can tell you that the real estate commission will not care if you give the inspection report to buyer number two.
If they gave it to you.
Pardon? If you have it, correct. Yeah.
Do you have access to it, yes or no? Your due diligence should cover a listing agent. If the buyer agent checks yes, it's okay for you to have a copy of the inspection, you've got a copy of the inspection. You've been given it.
Okay.
We were talking about, an inspection report, let's say on a foreclosure house, does the listing agent then have to come forth with information like roof leaks, that there's not enough?
Does the listing agent know that the roof leaks, or he knows it based on the inspection that was done for buyer number one?
Correct.
Yes. Then it's a material fact and it must be disclosed.
Even though there's no requirement by the, let's say, the bank foreclosed, the lien holder that took it back, they don't have to fill out that.
It doesn't matter how you know. If I'm getting at your crux of it, it doesn't matter how you.
Question, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you happen to find out, but if you find out and it's reliable information and you have no particular reason to question it, that there's an issue, then you now have a duty to pass that information on. You can also pass on whatever else you know, like either it's in the process of being fixed, or the report said this might be an issue, it's not clear if it is an issue or not, but it's worth checking. You know, often inspectors will do that sort of, we see an issue here, but we think you ought to get a structural engineer. If it's that, then that. But you will never be in trouble for disclosing what you know about a property, even if it's negative. And even though you are the agent for the seller, the law imposes on you a duty to disclose material facts that you know or reasonably should know to the buyer. And even though that theoretically can harm your seller's bargaining position, the General Assembly has declared that the public policy of the state should be, if you're a licensee, you're a professional, your job is to market properties, you need to disclose the bits and pieces you know that are not as appealing as the other pieces. So, Debbie.
Different question. Going back to question 17, do you know how many bedrooms are allowed by the septic permit? Last year we adopted a policy that the number of bedrooms that you put in the MLS cannot exceed the number allowed by the septic permit. And we did that based on complaints and reprimands. Does this question change?
Not really.
The way we did that?
No, because keep in mind, we're still talking about the seller's disclosure statement, and we're getting hung up on the difference between the duty between the seller versus the broker. So brokers should not be advertising more. You know, this comes up more in vacation rentals than anywhere else, but it comes up in sales too from time to time about how many bedrooms are permitted and how many people theoretically can occupy the property. So, am I getting at your question? Yeah, so I think what you've done in the MLS is a good thing. Okay, let's move on to, the ever-popular broker price opinions. So I would assume that people are generally pleased about this. Maybe not, I don't know, if the appraisers in the room might not be pleased about this. But there was a lot of issue in the last several years over brokers performing broker price opinions, which are essentially a CMA, right? I mean, they're an estimate of value by the broker. And brokers were doing them for a fee for lenders regularly. And that was prohibited by the law because the law said only an appraiser can determine value. And it caused quite a lot of issue because there's a huge market demand for somebody to just do a quick and dirty, you know, what's it going to sell for kind of assessment, not a full-blown appraisal. And so we had this issue. It came up ultimately in the General Assembly, which now says that brokers can perform a broker price opinion or a market analysis, whatever you want to call it, so long as you meet a bunch of requirements. And so maybe the requirements themselves make it less appealing, but at least you can do it now for a fee. You have to use comparable sales, whether we're talking about income properties or just the traditional residential property where you look at comps and say, okay, this one has a garage and this one has a swimming pool, and make your adjustments. You're not supposed to do the mathematical modeling, you know, the Zillow, Trulia kind of approach where you just do some math and figure out, well, it's sitting right here in this spot, so it must be worth, you know, whatever. There's a distinction in the law that I can't explain to you. I can only tell you what it says, which is you cannot estimate value or worth, just the probable selling price. So, whatever that means, that's what it says. The probable, so when you do one of these things, make sure that you couch it in terms of the probable selling price and not the value or worth of the property. Because if it's the value or worth of the property, then you have just performed an appraisal and you need an appraisal license. So, we had a heck of a time writing our educational materials actually about this because it's a pretty fun distinction. So you have to be a full broker. I went with full broker as opposed to broker here, where you can do the BPO for a fee. So XYZ lending company wants you to do a drive-by and figure out what something's worth. If you're not on provisional status, you can do it. If you are on provisional status, you cannot do it. It's effective last October. You cannot ever do it as the basis for a mortgage loan. If the reason the lender is calling you is because they've got a customer who wants to buy that property and they're trying to figure out whether they should finance and how much they should finance, then you can't do it for that no matter what. If you're a provisional broker, you cannot charge a separate fee. I worried about the slide after it was too late, so let me just say, as to the second bullet, you may perform a BPO or CMA as a service to a buyer or seller and receive a commission. I mean your regular sales commission. That's the closing of the transaction. With that slide, I don't mean some other commission. I mean you get to the end, you've done a CMA for somebody in the process. You can't charge a separate fee for it, but of course you can still get your regular commission when the time comes. So that's what that's supposed to mean. This is in the law, the required contents of the BPO. Of course, we've gotten some pushback about this, but this is what the General Assembly says. You've got to have it in writing, and then you've got to have all these bases touched when you do one. So what the purpose is, the description of the property, your basis for coming to your conclusion, and the assumptions or limits that you put on how you got there. If you have an interest in the transaction, your LLC is buying the property, for example, or owns the property, the effective date of your assessment of the probable selling price, your name, your license number, your signature, the date you signed it, which might be different from the effective date. You know, you went out and looked at it 2 weeks ago and now you finally finished it and you're signing it today. Your brokerage firm, a disclaimer that it's not an appraisal, and a copy of the assignment request. I think we've gotten more concerns about that last one than anything else because so often people do it based on a phone call. But now you need to get them to at least shoot you an email. You need something with words written down that you can put in your file. So a text message that you can copy onto a printer, anything that can give you words on paper. That's what you need. In response to the law, the commission was required to also develop rules for brokers. So the commission's rules are summarized here on this slide, and they basically say you need to know your market area. You know, don't go off to Asheville or the beach and do a BPO there unless you have some reasonable knowledge of those markets. And maybe you do. You know, maybe you grew up in Wilmington and you have a second home there and you're there all the time. And maybe you moved from there yesterday, and so you can do one there better than you can do one here. That kind of thing, but make sure you have some basis for it. You're supposed to be objective and free from influence. You're not supposed to get paid to arrive at a particular conclusion about what it's going to sell for. You are required to inspect both inside and out unless you get a waiver of that inspection in writing. So the presumption is you're going to actually go to the property. I mean, gosh, really? You're going to go to the property, you're going to look at it, you're going to look at the inside, you're going to make sure that actually the building sits there and then it's in decent shape. But some people don't want you to do that. Some people don't want you to spend the time. If you get a waiver in writing that says you don't have to go, then you don't have to go. But otherwise, the default position is that you go and you look at it. You're supposed to use appropriate methodology, so, you know, comparable sales if it's a residential property. You can use the income approach if it's a commercial property. The law, I didn't have room to put it all in here, but there are standards in the commission's rules about choosing comparable properties and how to make adjustments. There's a bit of a science to it, you know, to know what the difference is between two identical properties, except that this one has a one-car garage and this one has a two-car garage, and maybe the one across the street has no garage, but it has a swimming pool, you know, to try to sort out those little differences and account for them properly. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
With all due respect, why didn't you just do away with those things? I mean, it's ridiculous.
First of all, it's not about me.
Don't blame it on the general assembly. They haven't got no business being there anyway.
No, I understand, and we've heard that sentence.
If Bank of America can pay a $10.5 billion fine over fraudulent mortgages, they can pay a staff appraiser to go out and look at a house and see what it's worth.
Yeah, and well, and likewise though, a broker, you, as an individual broker, you can make your own decision. Is it worth it to me or is it not? These are all the hoops I have to jump through. They're offering me $50. Is it worth it for me or not? If you haven't made a sale in the last 6 months and even $50 would help you, then it might be worth it to you to do it. And otherwise it might not. You might have access to data and what have you that makes this a worthwhile proposition. But yeah, there are clearly a lot of hoops to jump through, and you can see that the appraiser, you can see in the law and the rules, the concerns that appraisers had about what they perceive as an infringement on their territory. And so, and trying to make sure that if you do one, that you have a reasonable basis for the value you come up with. But again, you know, this is what it says today. If you want to change it, just because it's in the law doesn't mean it has to be that way forever. And depending on how strongly you feel about it, you can talk to your own legislators about changing the law if you want to. And if you think the law is fine, but you don't like the commission's rules, you can communicate that to the commission directly and say, we think you ought to relook at these rules, and here's why. And I assure you, they will pay attention to that. They absolutely care about knowing whether the rules that are in place are manageable and reasonable and make sense, or whether they don't. And that's why things change, like the disclosure statement, where it's like, this thing just isn't working anymore, we gotta fix it. So let us know if you feel strongly, and I promise you that they will pay attention to it. So right now we have in the hopper some other pending, oh, yes sir, sorry.
Sorry, Miriam.
No, it's fine.
Just to make sure I've got it straight in my head, there's a difference between the email I get from a banking institution that says, hey, do this BPO for $30, and a telephone call that I get from a resident who says, I'm thinking about selling my house, how much is it worth?
Well, it depends. If you're going to get paid for it, then there's no difference whatsoever. If when you go out to that resident and say, this is what you're going to get paid, this is what I think I can sell your house for, give me $50 or $100 or $20. If you're getting paid for it, you got to follow all this stuff. If you're doing it as just part of your regular listing presentation or as a mechanism for getting customers to say, you know, come list your house with me if you're thinking about listing. I get these all the time. You know, are you thinking about listing? Let me come tell you what I think about your property and what it might sell for and so on and so forth. If you want to do that as a service and use it as a way to meet people and maybe get future clients, go for it. It's when you decide to charge a fee that you run into this whole set of stuff that you have to do. All right, let me keep going so I at least hit the highlights here. These are the ones that are in the hopper right now. At the request of Cindy Chandler, who's from around here, we have relooked at our whole trust account rule, which is one of the longest rules we have. It's currently Rule 107, and it goes on and on and on and on about how you're supposed to handle the money of other people. And of course, one of the whole reasons the Real Estate Commission exists is because you all do handle money for other people, and there's a concern that it be safeguarded. But again, it's a situation where things sometimes just get so, you know, you just keep tacking on. It's like the offer to purchase. Somebody says, you know, there's a problem with X, and so you add in a paragraph. And then there's a problem with Y, so you add in a new paragraph. And pretty soon the thing is just so long and complicated that nobody can follow it anymore, and things don't make logical sense. So we have looked at that rule and reorganized it and separated it out into 3 separate rules based on what those topics are to try to make it easier for people to get where they need to go to understand what their obligations are. So you can read all about it on our website. It's all up there. That's one thing. The next thing is that we have asked to increase the renewal fee $5. It's been $40 since the mid-90s. And we're now asking for it to be $45. So if you have a concern about that, now's the time to let the Real Estate Commission know that even $5 matters. But we are in the process of trying to raise your fees. So I want you to know it, because we are. We also want to be able to deal with our licensees online more to make it easier for you to communicate with us and vice versa. We're still going to pick up the phone, so no worries there. If you want to call and talk to us, whether it's a legal question or a license status question, an affiliation question, a firm question, there are people there who will talk to you right now whenever you want. But some people don't want to talk to us. Can you imagine? Yeah, no, I don't want to have to talk to the Real Estate Commission if I can avoid it. And so we're trying to modernize things to allow you to communicate with us online, to submit your supervision forms online, your activation forms, that kind of stuff. Some of our rules were written at a time when online was a glimmer in Bill Gates' eye, but that's it. Or maybe Al Gore or whoever invented the internet. But at any rate, we actually had to go back and modify some of our rules to do it that way. So we're in the process of that so that we can be in the modern world. This last one, how many brokers in charge in the room? Okay, so this one's important for you all to pay attention to, because it says, right now there are options for you if you lose your status. You lose your broker in charge status or eligibility, like you fail to renew or you don't take your CE. You have different choices about how to get back to being a broker in charge, but the rule is very confusing and it's difficult to figure out exactly which choices who gets at what time, because there's all these caveats. And so the Commission has made a policy decision to pursue a change that would just say, if you don't keep your eligibility up as a broker in charge, and then later you want to become broker in charge again, you got to take the 12-hour course. Whether you took the 12-hour course 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago, or 60 years ago, doesn't matter. You've got to take the course. You can avoid the course by keeping your eligibility, which means you renew your license on time and you take your CE on time. You do those things and you'll be good. But if you don't, then we're going to make you sit through 12 hours. And some people see that as a punishment rather than the golden educational opportunity. But anyway, that's where we're headed. If you don't like that idea, you need to let the Real Estate Commission know before its February meeting, which, as I think is on your slide materials, is February 6th, because that's when they're going to decide. So, okay. If you ever want to weigh in on our rules, whether these that I've just talked about or ones that you hear about in the future, our rules are always on our homepage. This isn't a very good slide, but you get the gist of it. There in yellow, that's our homepage. And there in yellow are the rule changes, and if there are rule changes in the works, you will see right on the homepage in that middle white section, rule changes, and then a link where you can go to see a summary of what we're trying to do, and then the actual text of what we're trying to do. And you can read it word for word if you care. You can go to the one that you care about and read that one word for word. We usually have a red line version where it shows you how it was or how it is now, and then the words stricken through that we're going to get rid of, and the new words added are underlined to show this is what we're going to put into it. And so, and then a place for you to be able to comment. The idea being, we are the government. We're going to tell you what to do, but we don't want to just tell you what to do. We want to know what you think, really. So tell us what you think. If you don't like it or you think it's a good idea, but then this is how you find out what we're up to and whether you think it's a good idea, whether you want to organize a movement, whether you want to come to the commission and say, what are you people thinking? You know, that's happened, and it's a good thing because it makes us take notice and say, okay, we're getting some pushback here. Maybe there's something we need to relook at. So you can track them from start to finish on the site. You can submit written comments. You can come. We have a public hearing every time we do a rulemaking. We've already had the one for the 4 rules that I showed, including the $5 fee and the broker in charge thing. We already had our public hearing, but the comment period has not expired. So there's still time to make written comments, and you just can send us an email, or you can write us a letter, or you can write it down and can deliver it to us. Even bad language and whatever you want to say, and it'll all go into record, and the commission will look at it before the commission votes to decide what it's going to do. Your association representatives, just so you know, are always at the Real Estate Commission. It's usually David McGowan, occasionally it's Katie Thomas, but they come to virtually every meeting. They are often called upon to say, what would the Association of Realtors think about this? Some Sometimes they just answer. Sometimes they say, let us talk to our members and come back. But do know that you are having input that way, at least from the North Carolina Association of Realtors, to say what the association's point of view might be. Okay, how am I doing for time? Not too well. Or really well if you're like dying to get out of here. So I've got 5 minutes left. I think rather than go through, well, 1 minute on this, and then I'm just going to see what other lingering questions you have, and then depending on whether you need the room, if we need to vacate, we'll vacate, but otherwise I can stay and answer questions for as long as you want. So we are looking at asking the General Assembly to change our laws on these 4 topics. There's materials about it. The expunction of criminal records, you probably don't care because it relates to licensed applicants. And there's a law that says that if you had a criminal record, you can ask for it to be expunged, but any state government agency that took action based on your criminal record now has to undo that action. Which is all well and good, but that means that if somebody 15 years ago applied for a license and they had, you know, say larceny, theft convictions, and we said, you know what, you're not a good candidate for a license, we're not going to license you. Great, now 15 years later, they've turned around, they've become a good citizen, they get their record expunged, and the way the law is written now, it's arguable that we would have to just create a license and give it to them. And what we'd like to say is, look, it's been 15 years, they should go to school, they should pass the exam, they should show us that they're up to speed on the current law and rules, and then we'll license them and we won't hold the criminal thing against them. But to just hand out a license seems like a bad idea, so we're trying to fix that. We are looking at our license application fees. These also won't affect you because you're already licensed, but right now, our license application fee is $30. It's been $30 since the 1970s. What we should have done is periodically gone along and asked for a little increase, but we never have. And now what's happening is that you guys, as licensees, are subsidizing the applicants because we can't license people for $30. We just can't. It costs us more than $100. So we're going to the General Assembly and we're going to ask them for up to $100. We don't know yet what we're going to ask them, and we might not ask them at all if they tell us you've got to be kidding, which is what they told us 2 years ago. It was like, yeah, no, don't even ask us. So we didn't. So that's a political question. We may ask for it, we may not, but we're going to test the waters. We're looking at commercial transactions trust money because of the financing arrangements that so many commercial properties have where they're leasing those properties and their lenders say you've got to handle the incoming rents a particular way, and that doesn't always jive with the commission's trust account rules. We're trying to fix that. And the last thing is about public records. We've had some stalking issues and that kind of thing where people, the law right now says everything we know about you except your social security number is public records. Everything. So if somebody wants your email address, or they want to know where you live, or they want to know whatever you put down about where you went to high school on your application, any of that stuff, it's all a public record under current law. And if somebody calls us and says, I want to have it, then we have to give it to them. And that puts you in a bad spot from time to time, so we're trying to limit that down. And what we would like to get is a difference between your public person and your private person, so that if you want to give us a public email and your office address, we would consider those public records, but your home address and your home email might not be. And we don't know where we're going to get on this one either, because in general, the legislature is in favor of having records be open for the public to see, and that sounds great until somebody is being stalked or something like that, and we have to tell them no. So that's what we're up to. And there's a little bit more in your materials. Can I answer any questions before we finish up?